Okay, so next we've talked so far about the science of reading. Now let's talk about an application of it, which is targeting reading interventions. Let's first talk about what assessment is and how you use it. There's 4 purposes of assessment. Number one is, the first one I'm talking about, but I'm not going to talk about it, is program evaluation. That's the state test. State test. I'm an interventionist. I go to schools and help teachers who, they don't know what to do with these kids. I have not once ever asked, well, let me see a state test results. State tests are usually written for political reasons, not psychometric ones. They're usually not very good tests. So I'll put it in there as an issue of program evaluation to say, yeah, this school's doing well or not, I suppose, but that's about the extent of it. Now, I'm more interested in the next 3. Screening, which is which of your kids are not meeting expectations, which kids need help. Diagnostic, once we see the kids who need help, now let's look and see what the needs of those kids are through diagnostic assessments. And then lastly, you monitor student progress. The measure that you use should match the purpose for which you're using it. That sounds like a simple statement, but you'd be surprised how often that's not the case. I'm going to pick on, I mentioned leveled literacy intervention. Leveled literacy intervention relies on the Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment system. When that came out a few years ago, I do research on instructional level. And so when it said, which by the way has got to be the most misused term in all of education, but when this came out and said it is used to assess an instructional level, so okay, let's look at it. So I got the manual. And right, like on the very first page, it says this test can be used to screen kids for reading problems. Oh, okay, let's see if it can. With no evidence, by the way, to support that in that entire document. So we got a couple hundred kids, 900 kids or so, gave them 3 tests. This is the measure of academic progress, the NWEA. It's a good screener. Talk about that in a minute. We use that as our criterion. This is Ames Web, Ames Web DIBELS, CBM, curriculum-based measurement, Ames Web, and then this is the Fontes and Pinnell with 900 second and third graders. So we had diagnostic accuracy. So among the 646 kids that did well on the MAP test, 501 of them also did well on the Ames Web measure, which is 0.78. So think of this as like a grade. 78%. That's a C plus. Not great, but certainly I'm not putting the right one. Yeah, 78%. So acceptable, but not great. But among the 322 kids who didn't do well on the MAP, 276 of them also did not do well in Ames Web, which is 86%, a B plus, much better. I'm much more interested in sensitivity than specificity. I want to find the kids who struggle more than identify the kids who will do well. So in this case, overall correct classifications, 80%. Again, B minus, not great, but certainly acceptable, and good sensitivity, good identifying struggling readers. Now, let's look at the Fontes and Pinnell. 556 kids did well on the MAP. 367 did well on the F&P, which is 66%. That's like a D, maybe D plus, not great. But among the 290 kids who didn't do well on the MAP, only 90 of them did not do well on the F&P, which is 31%. That's not even on the grading scale, it's so low. Overall correct classification of 54%, which means I could spend thousands of dollars to buy all this stuff. I could train my teachers how to do it. I could take 20 or 30 minutes per kid to administer the test, or give each teacher a quarter and you'll get it right just as often.
I think we just to spend a minute on that. So I'm really just thinking about, I know we have a lot of districts who use, they maybe used the DRA before. I think a lot of districts that use BAS now.
Okay.
And they might also use like an oral reading fluency, either FastBridge or Ames or DIBELS. And so if you had a district that you were working with that kind of used both assessments, would you say, maybe put more stock in, especially finding, when you're trying to find who are the struggling readers,
yes.
Maybe put more stock in the FastBridge?
Yes, yes. DRA, F&P, all of those are not good screeners. They have a different purpose. FastBridge, great screener. I'm on the research board for FastBridge, but I don't get paid for it. So it doesn't matter if to me if you use it or not. Great tool. STAR, wonderful screener, especially for older kids. STAR and MWA MAP. I don't love those for younger kids, but certainly 5th grade and above. really good tools. AimsWeb, Dibbles, FastBridge, really great screeners. They don't have much instructional utility. All it does is tells you can read, can't read. That's it. It doesn't tell you what to do. So I'm talking today diagnostically. So once you see the kid just struggling reader, then you have to measure decoding, fluency, et cetera. I'll talk about that in a second. The other approach, which is the other purpose, which is not on here, but similar to diagnostic, is instructional. Now, as an interventionist, sit down with a kid and having them read to me from different levels of difficulty. Those are invaluable data. I used to do that all the time. What I have a problem with is the score. That score is unreliable. Remember, all scores have a standard error of measure. You want that standard error of measure to be as small as possible. There's always going to be one. The F&P has a standard error of measure, as does DRA, of about plus or minus 2 whole levels. So if the kid's an M, and the range is so like what, K to O? So any score between a K and an O is basically the same score. So a teacher says to me, wow, my kid was a K in the fall, and now he's already up to an O. Isn't that great? Psychometrically, it's the same score. If the kid goes from K to W or something, that's a different conversation. But that's within the same score. So if the cut point is an M and the kid gets a K or an N, I have no confidence in that decision whatsoever. STAR, NWA, FastBridge, they're designed to be screeners. They do that better. What I would do is screen all the kids who score low, who need intervention, do diagnostic work. Kids who have concerns, but you're not really sure, maybe not the point of needing intervention per se, then that's where those data, having a kid read to you, those are really cool. By the way, the F&P at the back of the book has a lot of wonderful tools. They have screening, they have decoding measures, they have fluency, they have great tools in the back. No one uses those. Everyone just looks at the dang score. Says, oh, he's an M. And here's the other problem with it. Now I'm getting all fired up. Is I once saw a kid, and I forget the numbers, I forget the exact details, walk up and pick up a book and say, oh, I love this, it's dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs. I can't wait to read it. Oh, it's an M. I'm a J, and put it back. I wanted the screen. That should never happen. The kid picks up the book all excited to read it. I don't want that kid putting it back because it's an M and I'm a K. How well a child reads has more to do with their background knowledge, their vocabulary, and even their interest than it does the supposed difficulty level of a text. So someone just asked, what diagnostic measures would you use? Okay, let's talk about that. So one more point. You monitor student progress, CBM, AimsWeb, Dibbles, the FastBridge reading fluency measures. Those are wonderful tools to monitor progress. Not rich data, but they tell you can read, can't read, getting better at reading or not. And they're quick. That's the advantage for progress monitoring. Okay, so what do you do instead? Here's my diagnostic approach. I think I was going to take a few minutes to make the point, but given that people are already asking that question, maybe I don't need to make this point. I'll do it real quickly. So there's lots of good interventions out there, and we tend to think of them as leading to proficient reading. But that's based on flawed logic. The National Reading Panel did its famous meta-analyses, and let's look at the one they did on phonemic awareness. 52 studies of phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is knowing that words are made of sounds. You could take cat and cat as cat. And if you take the and cat and make it a b, that's now bat. If I take at and say it fast, that's cat. All of that's phonemic awareness. And they wanted to see, does teaching kids phonemic awareness help them learn how to read? They found 52 studies, and they looked at, does phonemic awareness help with phoneme manipulation? If you teach them that, can they do the k and cat and make it a b, and now it's bat? Does it help spelling? And does it help reading? And they looked at reading a whole bunch of different ways: word reading, pseudo word reading, reading comprehension, etc. And they found that it was effective. It's better to teach, strong effects, but I would argue 0.5 is not strong. It's moderate, but still good effects. Teaching 1 or 2 is better than trying to teach more than that. So you tend to think of, I think of phonological awareness, of which phonemic awareness is a part of. Phonological awareness is sort of word, it's syllable. It's, once you get down to the phoneme level, it's phonemic awareness. Rhyming is kind of that bridge between the two. So I really try and teach rhyming, and then by itself, and then we teach blending and segmenting kind of together, and then we teach manipulation. So rhyming, blending and segmenting sort of together, and then manipulation. I think that's a good approach to use. But I will say this, if your child struggles with rhyming, let it go. We did a couple studies published in the Journal of Ed Research where we found that kids who were from urban areas, poor, impoverished areas, English language learners, oftentimes didn't do well with the rhyming intervention, but still learned how to read just fine. So if they're struggling with rhyming, try skipping it and moving on and seeing how they do. And Phonemic Awareness instruction benefited reading comprehension. Now, when this came out, it was huge news. As a reading interventionist, I was doing phonemic awareness interventions all over the place. And I saw that it didn't always work. And that perplexed me. Like, well, the National Reading Panel says it should work. So I went back and looked at the original data. This was in 2003. Now, again, effect sizes 0.8, 0.5, 0.2. Remember that list of things they called reading? I thought those were kind of different but related skills. So I broke it up. If the study used pseudo words, nonsense words, etc., 24 studies did that. Phonemic awareness instruction had a large effect, 0.84. If they used words in isolation, teaching kids phonemic awareness helped them read word lists. 48 studies did that, large effect, 0.92. But if it used actual connected text reading, which 24 studies did that, the average effect size went way down to 0.37. Still not bad, not great, but acceptable. Not great, but okay. And that got me thinking among several implications. One was, when should you do a phonemic awareness intervention? When the kid doesn't have phonemic awareness, period. You'd be surprised how radical of an idea that is. There is no such thing as a universal intervention. That's my issue with Orton-Gillingham being pushed by states as every school required to do it. It's not the right intervention for every kid. It's not even the right intervention for every kid who struggles or for every kid who has a diagnosis with dyslexia. So we have to stop thinking of these interventions as leading to proficient reading, and start thinking of them as leading to very specific skills. And our task is to figure out what those interventions address, and I'll show you a framework to do that and show you how to do that in just a minute. And then assess the kids, figure out what they need, and match the intervention to the student's needs. So what I do is I assess the National Reading Panel, 4 areas. I look at 4. I group vocabulary and comprehension together because it's really hard to tease that apart. Is it a comprehension issue? Is it vocabulary? Intervention should probably address both. It's really tough to do. MAP and STAR reading are good measures of comprehension. These are they're measures of overall reading, sure, but they're also direct measures of reading comprehension. Fluency, or any oral reading fluency measure, Ames-Webb, Dibbles, Fastbridge, any of those. There's others. There's tests of silent contextual reading fluency. There's the word reading efficiency test. So any of those are fluency measures, reading fluency. Phonics, nonsense word fluency, word attack measure, word attacks tests, even spelling. Now, spelling is a terrible screener because there are tons of kids who are let me say this right. There are any kid who struggles with decoding is probably a bad speller, but there are lots of kids who spell poorly who are just fine decoders. So spelling is not a good screener, but once they're identified as a struggling reader and they're bad in spelling, that's an indication they may struggle with decoding. Someone just asked about Heggerty. So it's a great tool. We'll talk about in a minute. It's a great tool if used well, but it's not an intervention. It's a supplemental instructional approach. Talk about that in just a few minutes. I'll probably talk about that more in the third section. And then phonemic awareness. We developed the phonemic awareness inventory with Press. You mentioned Press. Some of you are familiar with that. That's a great tool. There's the comprehensive test of phonological processing has a phonemic awareness subtest in it. Any sound test, phoneme segmentation fluency, first sound fluency, those are all indications of phonemic awareness. So what I do is I try and assess all these areas to find the most fundamental skill in which the kid struggles, okay? So if I assess comprehension and they're low, okay, now I assess fluency. If they're low in comprehension but have good fluency, we know comprehension is their target. If we assess comprehension and then assess fluency, that's low, we look at decoding. If they're low in comprehension, low in fluency, but have good decoding, we know fluency is their target. If they're low in comprehension, low in fluency, good decoding, fluency is their target. If they're low in all 3, we might look at phonemic awareness. Now, I'll tell you, I don't look systematically at phonemic awareness beyond the 2nd grade. Most children who struggle with reading beyond 2nd grade, 3rd, 4th, 5th, certainly middle school, have phonemic awareness. It's very rare. It can happen, but it's very rare for a child to lack phonemic awareness 3rd grade and above. So if they have, and I'll show you research to support that in a few minutes. So if they have really low skills in third, fourth, fifth grade, I might look at their phonemic awareness, but I don't do it systematically. Okay. So some conversation about screening with nonsense words. Yeah. Oh, versus decodable words. So here's my take on that. And there's not a lot of research around this. Several studies have shown that you make the same types of decisions with nonsense words as sort of decodable real words. But my colleague Lori Hellman at the University of Minnesota, when I was there, used to argue with me and say, I don't care about that. The point is, I don't ever want to put a word in front of a kid who's an English language learner for which that's not a real word. And that makes sense to me. So it's a questionable screener, I would argue, for most grades except first. And that pains me to say that, but first grade is so difficult. There's no good measure in first grade. For the kids in first grade it's such a transitional year that there's not a good screener in first grade, I would argue. FastBridge has its sentence reading fluency. That seems to be pretty good. I'm encouraged about that. Most of the time you use a nonsense word fluency as a screener in first grade. I don't use it as a screener for any other grade. I will use it as a decoding measure. So if I got a kid who's a struggling reader, I can use this to see if they can sound out the words. Okay. My preference is to use the low frequency decodable words. So when I was with Press, we developed a whole series of highly decodable low frequency words to use to assess instead of nonsense word fluency. But again, it's a screener in first grade. It's acceptable. I think FastBridge word sentence reading is better, but it's acceptable. But I wouldn't use it as a screener in any other grade.
I just want to point out, I think the reason that you're saying that you use low incidence, highly decodable real words is because we do have kids, maybe some who live in your own houses at home like mine, who are really good memorizers. And if we're really trying to determine whether or not they can decode versus call out a memorized word, that's some of the argument for using nonsense word fluency. But what I hear you saying is there's also potentially some measures that have some real words, but they're just not those words that my son would have memorized.
Yes, exactly, absolutely right. If the word appears somewhere on a word wall, it can't be on this, right? That type of thing. So I still argue nonsense word fluency is probably the better approach to go than that. But if there's a concern about using a nonsense word with a kid, you can use highly decodable low frequency words. But if the kid knows the word some other way, then it's no longer a measure of decoding. Exactly. So if they score low on all four, then we focus on phonemic awareness. So low in comprehension, low in fluency, low in decoding, good phonemic awareness, we hit decoding. Low on all four, we hit phonemic awareness. So I put in a flow chart. This flow chart doesn't make sense to me, but for some reason I think it makes sense to people. I'm just not one of them. You assess comprehension and vocabulary first. Well, that's not true. Don't hear me say that. That's not true. This flow chart looks that way, but you might start with decoding. You might start with, this is sort of all of them put together. You assess comprehension and vocabulary. Are they proficient? Then do core instruction. If they're low, then you look at fluency. Are they fluent? Yes, then intervene for comprehension. If their fluency is low, then you assess decoding. Can they decode? Yes, intervene for fluency. If not, look at phonemic awareness. Has phonemic awareness, intervene for decoding. If not, intervene for phonemic awareness. Okay. Now, if the kid's a fourth grader, no, I'm sorry, if the kid's a second grader, don't start with comprehension, start with decoding. Okay. If the kid's a kindergartner, start with phonemic awareness, basically. But if the kid's in, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, comprehension is a good place to start. And I mentioned this already. Here's the phonemic awareness inventory. There's also, the Press has a decoding inventory. I help co-author Press, but I get no royalties. So me talking about it, I don't benefit from it financially at all. But it's a quick little screener. You can see initial sounds, final sounds, segmenting, blending, and manipulating. A cool little quick tool. Takes just a couple minutes to do, and you can tell if the kid struggles with phonemic awareness or not. Now, let me show you how to cheat. I'll do this real quickly. This is the MAP, Measures of Academic Progress, NWA. So MAP has a RIT score. I don't know how to interpret the RIT scores. I don't know what those mean. I look at the percentile rank. So any kid at or below the 25th percentile is certainly struggling with comprehension. This is reading fluency, which is a direct measure of reading fluency, right? Or reading fluency. It's a good screener, but also a direct measure of reading fluency. Now, I also look at their accuracy, percentage of words read correctly. That's a great proxy for decoding. If a child is reading less than 93% of the words correctly, or in fifth grade and above, 95%, if they're reading less than 93% in second grade here, there's a good chance he's struggling to break the code. So let's look at some kids. Here, 6th percentile for comprehension, 36 words a minute. I don't know what the cut point is. Let's say it's 60. 86% correct. That kid's probably struggling with decoding. 1st percentile comprehension, or reading fluency, 30 words a minute, 77% correct. That kid needs decoding, I promise. So if they're low in all three areas, I focus on decoding. Now phonemic awareness is not on this list because these kids are in 3rd grade and above. I'll come back to that in a second. But this kid, 8th percentile, 50 words a minute, 96% correct. 37th percentile, 54 words a minute, 95% correct. These two kids probably need some fluency building. That's it. So these kids probably need a fluency intervention. These kids need a decoding intervention. So these data can really help you to differentiate. We teach our teachers how to sit down and look at these data and target the intervention based on it. Let's come back to phonemic awareness. Here's my scientific criterion. We do phonemic awareness we assess phonemic awareness with older kids if they're really, really low. That's my scientific criterion. I have 3 kids here that are really, really low. So I'm going to pull these 3 kids and do my PAI with them, the phonemic awareness assessment inventory. It takes like 5 minutes per kid, 10, 15 minutes, I'll be done. And have a good sense of these kids. There's a good chance these kids need a phonemic awareness intervention. So there's those 3 kids I might pull and do a quick phonemic awareness assessment, but the rest I'm probably just going to go with what the data say here. So again, 87%, 27 words a minute, 3rd percentile, that's decoding. These kids might need phonemic awareness. These two kids with high accuracy probably need fluency building, probably. Does this work? Well, we did a meta-analysis in 2018, 27 studies, average effect size of small group reading interventions, 0.54. All of the control group, all met what works clearinghouse, all had a control group. There we go. 15 met what works clearinghouse standards. The average effect size among those is 0.59. So the good studies had a good effect. The slightly smaller for the 7 studies that met with reservations. If you targeted the interventions, I just said, decoding if you need decoding, etc., the average effect size was 0.65, quite good. If you used a comprehensive intervention that tried to address 3 or more, the average effect size was 0.36, quite a bit smaller. Still not terrible, by the way, but quite a bit smaller. So that's why I would argue things like read naturally doesn't work for every kid. Orton-Gillingham doesn't work for every kid. Orton-Gillingham's a decoding intervention, has very little phonemic awareness, very little fluency, very little comprehension. So they need one of those areas. That's not the answer. Read 180, wonderful program, but that's a comprehension intervention with some fluency. If I have a high school kid who struggles with decoding, Read 180 will not work. I can almost guarantee it. Our task is to figure out what interventions you have, address what area, and then use data to determine what the kids need, match them up. Your effectiveness will probably, according to this meta-analysis of 27 studies, double, almost double. Okay, questions about that before we talk about some specific research-based approaches? Oh, we'll talk about heavy in just a second, okay?
It's interesting, we have some MTSS training going on right now, and I know they're working on pathways. And so in those pathways, I hope some of those folks are able to watch this recording as well, because I think you just said about doubling the effect size if you focus on an intervention that targets a specific skill instead of one that's trying to do too many things at once. I think it's a good message.
The thing that's interesting is, say 5-10 years ago, that was a new idea. We just trying to get the most, get a research-based intervention. It would cost more money. We thought that was good too. And so Read 180 took off, and it's just not what most kids need at this high school level. Level literacy intervention, LLI, not a terrible intervention. It's a fluency-based intervention with comprehension. If I have a second grader who struggles with decoding, it's not going to help.
Yeah.
That's the issue with it.
And I think for some of our smaller, more rural schools, if they have, especially middle school, high school, I'm thinking about, if they have just a couple of students who need reading intervention, and like if I have 3 students who are maybe in our reading academic pathway, but those 3 kids need something very different, it seems like a daunting task. But I think when we break it down by some of these interventions are not 90-minute interventions. Some are very short interventions. That whole idea kind of seems a little more doable, that if this kid needs a repeated reading fluency intervention, we can do that while this one over here is doing some decoding or something.
Absolutely, that's right.